Welcome back, medical students. If you are cramming for your microbiology finals or gearing up for the boards right now, you are in the exact right place. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a classic, truly formidable pathogen, Corynebacterium diphtheriae. We're going to map out the entire bug-to-drug journey, translating all that raw microbiological data into the sharp clinical intuition you actually need for the wards. Here is the game plan for today's explainer. 1. We'll meet the culprit, diphtheria. 2. We'll cover pathogenesis and the exotoxin. 3. Clinical features and examination. 4. Complications of the heart and nerves. 5. Diagnosis and medical treatment. And finally, 6. Prevention and the Schick test. Section 1. Meet the culprit, diphtheria. To anchor our analysis today, we are going to be deconstructing an absolutely fantastic, comprehensive set of handwritten study notes. These pages perfectly capture the high-yield essentials, and we're going to break down these diagrams and labelings step by step to help you master this critical topic. Okay, let's just dive right into it. Starting right at the top of the notes with the core agent facts. Our target is Corynebacterium diphtheria. Taxonomically, you've got to remember this is a gram-positive rot, and crucially, it is non-spore forming. So where does it come from? Well, the source is strictly an infected person, and the mode of transmission is droplet infection. That means a simple cough or sneeze is literally all it takes. Once someone is exposed, the incubation period is incredibly fast. We're talking just 1 to 6 days before the trouble really begins. Section 2. Pathogenesis and the exotoxin. Tracking the exact anatomical pathway this bug takes is super fascinating. Following the flowchart from the notes, the bacteria sneaks in via the oral cavity. Its primary site of attack? It goes right ahead and colonizes the oropharyngeal tonsils. Once it sets up camp there, it multiplies rapidly. But here's the thing. The bacteria itself isn't really what does the heavy lifting. It actually releases a potent weapon, the diphtheria exotoxin. Now, this exotoxin is a 2-part biochemical machine with a specific molecular mechanism you will absolutely be tested on. The toxin splits into subunit A and subunit B. Subunit B is the binding subunit. It specifically locks on to the tonsillar epithelial cells to essentially act as a door to shift subunit A inside. Once inside the cytoplasm, subunit A, the active subunit, goes to work. This is the crucial takeaway right here. Subunit A inhibits protein synthesis by inhibiting the enzyme elongation factor 2, or EF2. Without protein synthesis, the tonsillar epithelial cells undergo rapid breakdown and trigger intense inflammation. Section 3. Clinical features and examination. Demographically, as the notes clearly point out, this disease is much more common in children than in adults. When they present to you in the clinic, they are going to have a classically toxic appearance. Vital signs will show a high-grade fever, and their primary complaints will be a severe sore throat accompanied by odynophagia, which is just the medical term for painful swallowing. But to really nail this diagnosis, you've got to look for the hallmarks on the physical exam. On examination, you are going to find diffuse cervical lymphadenopathy. The lymph nodes in the neck become so massively swollen and inflamed that it actually blurs the normal anatomical lines of the jaw and neck. This results in what is famously called a bull neck appearance. Seriously, if you see bull neck on a board question, diphtheria should instantly jump to the top of your differential. And this brilliantly illustrates the direct clinical result of that EFEI inhibition we discussed earlier. All those dead tonsillar epithelial cells clump together to form a creamy grayish-white pseudomembrane, entirely covering the tonsils. But here is the major clinical red flag. This pseudomembrane is highly vascularized at its base. If you try to scrape it off, it bleeds on removal. That bleeding pseudomembrane is your second definitive hallmark. Section 4. Complications, heart and nerves. So what happens when this D-toxin enters the bloodstream? The source notes explicitly highlight that the diphtheria toxin is fundamentally cardiotoxic and neurotoxic. Common cardiac complications include myocarditis and heart block, which you'll easily spot on the ECG as an increased or prolonged PR interval. Over on the neurological side, it causes cranial and peripheral neuropathies, but most terrifyingly, phrenic nerve palsy, which directly leads to respiratory failure. There's also a rare but critical mechanical complication. If the disease extensively spreads out to the pharynx, palate, tongue, esophagus, and larynx, it can actually cause complete airway obstruction. Section 5. Diagnosis and medical treatment. The investigation of choice is super straightforward, a throat swab for culture, but listen closely. You do not wait for the culture to come back before treating a toxic patient. Resuscitation is your absolute first priority. You might need to do a tracheostomy for that airway obstruction, set up mechanical ventilation if phrenic nerve palsy has set in, and push inotropes to support a failing heart. Pharmacologically, we use antibiotics to kill the bug, specifically injectable benzylpenicillin, ampicillin, or erythromycin. We also provide supportive care like antipyretics for the fever, antihistamines as oral decongestants, and analgesics for pain. But remember, antibiotics only kill the bacteria. They do absolutely nothing to neutralize the toxin already circulating in the body. That is exactly why the true drug of choice, as highlighted heavily in the notes, is the diphtheria antitoxin. This is a literal race against time. If you administer the antitoxin in under 48 hours, the required dose is between 20,000 and 40,000 international units. However, if the patient presents late, meaning over 48 hours into the infection, the necessary dose just skyrockets to between 80,000 and 120,000 international units. You have got to aggressively neutralize that toxin before it binds to the myocardial or nerve tissues. Section 6. Prevention and the Schick's test. Prophylaxis actually begins right after birth. The notes outline the standard DPT, that's diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus, vaccination schedule. It's given as a 0.5 milliliter intramuscular injection. The primary series hits at the 6th week, 10th week, and 14th week of life, which is then followed up by a vital booster shot right at 18 months. But how do we clinically confirm immunization after that vaccination? We use something called the Schick test. The procedure detailed in the source is honestly fascinating. You actually inject a tiny amount of diphtheria toxin straight into the skin of the patient's forearm. Then, you wait for 48 to 72 hours and carefully observe the injection site for a reaction, specifically keeping an eye out for any swelling and redness. Now, you have to pay close attention here because the interpretation is totally counterintuitive. If swelling and redness do not appear, that actually means the patient is immunized. Their body had the antibodies ready to go to instantly neutralize the toxin before it could damage the skin. On the flip side, if the swelling and redness do appear, it means the toxin went unchecked and damaged the local tissue, definitively proving the patient is non-immunized.
We have gone from a simple gram-positive rod all the way to a complex multi-system failure today. As you continue your board prep, I want to leave you with this thought to mull over. How does a tiny, microscopic mechanism, like the inhibition of elongation factor 2, scale up so violently to cause fatal systemic issues like heart block and respiratory failure? Understanding that incredible bridge between the molecular and the clinical is the real key to mastering these topics. Keep connecting those dots, and we will see you in the next explainer.